At Thanksgiving dinner, I got a call from an unknown number. Don't eat anything, trust me. My daughter-in-law insisted I eat, but knowing our bitter relationship, I refused. The next day, what I learned about my so-called illness made the police panic. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. My name is Helen Carter. For 40 years I was a pharmacist, a wife, and a mother. I lived a life governed by logic, precision, and the comforting certainty of chemical compounds. I believed that every problem had a solution that could be measured and understood. This is the story of how I discovered a problem I couldn't measure, a poison of the soul, and how I used the very science of my life to expose a nearly perfect crime. Now let me tell you my story. The air in my son's Mitchellville home was thick enough to slice. It was a rich, cloying concoction of roasting turkey, simmering cranberries, and a tension so palpable it felt like a physical presence in the room. Thanksgiving morning had dawned crisp and bright over the manicured lawns of our affluent Maryland suburb, but inside the walls of this grand center hall colonial a cold front had settled in and refused to budge. At 71, my world had become a careful negotiation of spaces, both physical and emotional. My body, governed by the unpredictable whims of myasthenia gravis, required a meticulous daily regimen of medication and rest. Myasthenia gravis is a subtle traitor, a neuromuscular disorder that wages a quiet war between your nerves and your muscles. It can weaken your eyelids, slur your speech, and in its most terrifying moments, steal the very breath from your lungs. As a retired pharmacist, I understood my condition with a clinical, unsentimental clarity. I knew my medications, their dosages, their interactions. I was the master of my own delicate chemistry. Living with my son Robert Jr. and his wife Tamara, however, presented a different kind of chemistry, one that was volatile, unpredictable, and I was beginning to suspect, toxic. Our relationship, Tamara's and mine, was a masterpiece of suburban cold warfare. It was a conflict waged not with raised voices but with the precise cutting elegance of polite smiles, veiled insults, and a constant, unspoken battle for control. Tamara, a registered nurse in her early 40s, was the very picture of modern success. She was beautiful, charismatic, the kind of woman who chaired PTA committees and organized neighborhood charity drives with an efficiency that was both admirable and terrifying. To the outside world, and especially to my son, she was the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect caring daughter-in-law, who had so generously opened her home to her husband's ailing mother. Robert, a successful financial advisor, was a good man, a loving son, but he was tragically willfully blind. He saw the tension between us as typical in-law friction, the stuff of sitcoms. He would pat my hand and say, "Tamara's just a little stressed, Mom. She has a lot on her plate." He couldn't see what I saw. He couldn't see the flicker of cold, hard resentment in her eyes when she had to help me up the stairs. He didn't hear the subtle, condescending edge in her voice when she asked if I had remembered to take my little pills. He saw a caregiver. I saw a woman who viewed my very existence as a line item of inconvenience on the budget of her perfect life. My granddaughter, Maya, was the only source of unfiltered light in that house. At 16, she possessed a sharp, quiet intelligence and an observant nature that reminded me so much of myself at her age. She saw the truth. I would catch her watching us, her brow furrowed with a worry that was too heavy for her young shoulders. She saw the way Tamara's smile never quite reached her eyes when she spoke to me. She saw the way my son would retreat into the safety of his phone whenever the tension between his wife and his mother became too thick to ignore. Maya was my ally, a silent, watchful confederate in a war she didn't understand but knew, instinctively, was being waged against her grandmother. This Thanksgiving, the performance was in full swing. Tamara was a whirlwind of hostess perfection, her laughter echoing through the grand open-concept kitchen as she directed the placement of floral arrangements and polished the family silver. She had insisted on hosting the entire extended family, a grand gesture that was, I knew, less about family unity and more about showcasing her impeccable taste and domestic prowess. She moved with the confident, unhurried grace of a woman completely in command of her domain, and her special focus, her most elaborate performance of the day, was me. She fussed over my comfort, fluffing pillows, bringing me glasses of water, and loudly reminding everyone of my delicate condition. It was a masterful portrayal of devotion, and Robert beamed at her, his face a mask of proud, oblivious adoration. But when we were alone for a moment in the hallway, her hand on my arm was not gentle. It was a grip, her fingers digging into my bicep. "Try not to have an episode today, Helen," she'd murmured, her voice a low, sweet poison. "We have guests." The centerpiece of Tamara's performance was the dish. She made a grand spectacle of it, announcing to the entire kitchen that she was preparing a special sweet potato casserole. "Just for me. The regular one has too much sugar for you, Helen," she declared, her voice ringing with a theatrical concern that made my skin crawl. "I found a wonderful organic recipe, gluten-free, dairy-free, tailored to your specific dietary needs. I want to make sure you have something delicious and healthy to enjoy." It was a gesture of such calculated kindness that it was almost brilliant. In front of my son and our relatives, it was an act of profound, selfless love. To me it was a threat. It was a way of isolating me, of marking me, of creating a single controllable variable in the chaotic equation of the Thanksgiving feast. My suspicions, however, were just a vague, formless unease, a gut feeling I couldn't substantiate. It was Maya who gave them a terrifying shape. Later she would find me in the den, her face pale, her eyes wide with a fear she couldn't quite articulate. She had been looking for her phone and had quietly entered the kitchen pantry. There, she had seen her mother. Tamara had been standing with her back to the door, her movements not those of a cheerful holiday cook, but of a technician in a lab. Maya described the scene in a hushed, trembling whisper. The special casserole dish was on the counter, separate from all the other food. Tamara was not humming or smiling. Her face was a mask of intense clinical concentration. She was wearing a pair of disposable latex gloves. On the small shelf next to her there was a mortar and pestle, a tool I knew she kept for grinding herbs, but which I as a pharmacist knew had other more precise applications. Maya watched as her mother carefully, methodically ground a small collection of pills into a fine white powder. Then, with an unnerving, deliberate precision, she had mixed the powder into my special casserole, stirring it with a focus that was both silent and terrifying. When she was done, she had peeled off the gloves, buried them deep in the kitchen trash, and turned to leave the pantry, her face once again arranged into the serene, smiling mask of the perfect hostess. Maya had slipped away, her heart pounding. She hadn't understood what she had seen, not really, but she knew with the unerring instinct of a child who senses danger, that it was wrong. Her story landed in the pit of my stomach like a stone. A mortar and pestle, latex gloves, a separate dish. My pharmacist's mind began to race, assembling the pieces, searching for a logical explanation, but every conclusion I came to was more chilling than the last. The gilded cage of my son's home had suddenly become a trap, and the Thanksgiving feast, a banquet of potential poison. The cheerful chaos of the house swelled as more guests arrived. Aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the rooms with a cacophony of laughter, shouted greetings, and the dull roar of the football game on the television. I felt a desperate need to escape the noise, to find a quiet space where I could process the terrifying information Maya had given me. My heart was a frantic trapped bird beating against the cage of my ribs. A mortar and pestle, the image so clinical and precise, refused to leave my mind. What pills? My own medications? Something else? My pharmacist's brain, trained for decades in the science of dosage and interaction, was running through a horrifying list of possibilities. I made my excuses, murmuring something about needing to check my blood sugar, and retreated to the quiet sanctuary of my first-floor bedroom. I closed the door, the sudden silence a welcome relief. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands trembling, my mind a whirlwind of fear and suspicion. Was I being paranoid? Was I, as Tamara so often implied, being dramatic? Could there be an innocent explanation, a special vitamin supplement, perhaps? But the latex gloves, the secrecy, the cold clinical precision Maya had described, it didn't add up. My phone, resting on the nightstand, suddenly buzzed, the vibration a startling intrusion into the quiet room. I glanced at the screen. It displayed 2 words that sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through my system. Unknown number. Normally I would have ignored it, dismissing it as a telemarketer or wrong number. But in that moment, in that house, every deviation from the norm felt like a potential clue, a piece of the terrifying puzzle that was assembling itself around me. My hand, slick with a cold sweat, reached for the phone. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb hovering over the green answer icon. Then, with a sense of grim foreboding, I swiped to accept the call. I raised the phone to my ear, my own breathing the only sound I could hear. "Hello," I said, my voice a dry, reedy whisper. The voice on the other end was a woman's, hushed and trembling, the words spoken so quickly they were almost a single panicked exhalation. "Mrs. Carter? Helen Carter?" "Yes," I said, my heart beginning to pound a frantic heavy rhythm against my sternum. Who is this? You don't know me. The voice rushed on, thick with an accent I couldn't quite place. My name? It doesn't matter, I'm a nurse. I work with your daughter-in-law. With Tamara, a nurse. The word landed with the force of a physical blow. This was real. This was not my imagination. Listen to me, the woman whispered, her voice tight with a terror that was contagious. I don't have much time. I shouldn't be doing this. She'll kill me if she finds out. But I can't. I can't live with myself if I don't say something. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. What is it? I urged, my own voice a choked whisper. What do you need to tell me? There was a sound of a door closing in the background on her end, and the woman's voice dropped even lower, becoming a frantic, barely audible hiss. It's about the dinner, she said. Thanksgiving dinner. Don't eat anything. Don't eat anything. Your daughter-in-law made for you, especially if she made something just for you. Don't eat it. Please. Just pretend to be sick. Anything. But don't eat the food. The words confirmed my deepest, most terrifying fears. The casserole. The special dish. It wasn't a gesture of kindness. It was a weapon. Why? I managed to ask, my throat tight. What did she do? I can't say more, the woman stammered, her panic escalating. I have to go. Just please, Mrs. Carter, don't eat anything. Trust me. And then with a sharp definitive click, the line went dead. I sat there in the ringing silence, the phone still pressed to my ear, the dead air a chilling echo of the woman's warning. The last two words she had spoken hung in the air, stark and terrifying. Trust me. In that moment I realized with a chilling certainty that this anonymous, terrified stranger on the other end of the phone was the only person in the world I could. The vague, formless dread that had been haunting me all day had finally coalesced into a single horrifying certainty. My daughter-in-law, the charming, respected registered nurse, was trying to kill me, and the murder weapon was a sweet potato casserole. The walk back to the dining room was the longest of my life. Each step felt heavy, deliberate, as if I were a condemned woman walking to her own execution. The cheerful sounds of the party, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the warm festive buzz, now seemed grotesque, a soundtrack to a horror film only I was watching. My mind, the logical, analytical pharmacist's mind, was working furiously, trying to process the new terrifying reality. The call had not been a prank. The woman's fear had been too real, too palpable. She was a nurse. She worked with Tamara. She knew something. And her warning, combined with what Maya had seen, created an irrefutable, terrifying conclusion. I was the target of a sophisticated, premeditated attack. Tamara hadn't just cooked a meal. She had compounded a prescription, and the intended effect was not health, but death. When I entered the dining room, all eyes turned to me. The long, elegant table was groaning under the weight of the feast, a beautiful Rockwellian portrait of holiday abundance. Robert rushed to my side, his face a mask of concern. "Mom, are you okay? You look pale." "I'm fine, dear," I said, forcing a weak smile, "just a little tired." Tamara, from her position at the head of the table, watched me with an unnerving reptilian stillness. Her face was a perfect mask of wifely concern, but her eyes, cold and dark, held a glint of something else, a watchful, predatory intensity. She was a scientist observing her experiment, waiting for the final critical phase to begin. "Come, Helen, sit," she said, her voice a silken trap. "Dinner is served. I saved you the seat of honor, right here next to me." The seat of honor, the place where she could best observe me, where she could ensure I followed her script. I allowed Robert to guide me to the chair, my body feeling strangely disconnected from myself, as if I were watching a play, and then the moment I had been dreading arrived. Tamara stood, holding the special smaller casserole dish with two pristine oven mitts. She beamed at the assembled guests. "Before we begin," she announced, her voice ringing with performative pride, "I just want to say how thankful I am to have my wonderful mother-in-law Helen living with us. Her health is a challenge, as you all know, but it is a blessing to be able to care for her." A murmur of appreciative agreement went around the table. Robert looked at his wife with tears of adoration in his eyes. My own stomach churned with a mixture of rage and disgust. "And because we love her so much," Tamara continued, her gaze locking with mine, "I made a very special dish, just for her, a healthy organic sweet potato casserole, with none of the sugar or dairy that can aggravate her condition. It's my Thanksgiving gift to you, Helen." She placed the dish on the table in front of me. It looked innocent enough, the top a perfectly browned landscape of toasted pecans, but to me it was a box of poison, wrapped in the pretty paper of her lies. With a flourish she took a large silver serving spoon, dug it into the casserole and lifted a heaping steaming portion onto the plate in front of me. The gesture was proprietary, final. She was not offering, she was administering. There, she said, her smile unwavering, but her eyes as cold and hard as chips of ice. You must eat this, Helen. Every bite. I made it just for you. To help with your strength. The insistence was the final damning clue. It was too much, too public. She was turning the offer of food into a direct challenge, a test of my obedience. In front of our entire family she was daring me to refuse her gift. To refuse would be to declare war, to cause a scene so ugly and dramatic that it would prove her narrative about me, the difficult, ungrateful old woman, to be true. To accept, however, was to sign my own death warrant. I looked down at the orange steaming mass on my plate. It was the physical embodiment of her hatred, a carefully compounded dose of death, and I was expected to eat it with a grateful smile. The entire table was watching me, their faces a mixture of curiosity and expectation. My son was beaming, so proud of his thoughtful, caring wife. My mind raced, searching for an escape route. The anonymous caller's words echoed in my head. Pretend to be sick. Anything. Refusing the food directly was not an option. It would be my word against the word of the beloved, respected nurse. It would be an accusation of such monstrous proportions that no one, least of all my son, would believe me. I would be the crazy, paranoid old woman, ruining Thanksgiving with my delusions. I needed a third option, a way to neutralize the threat without revealing my knowledge. And then, it came to me. A desperate high-stakes gambit that would use my own illness, the very thing Tamara was exploiting, as a weapon against her. I had to create a crisis, but it had to be my crisis. On my terms. I picked up my fork, the silver heavy and cold in my trembling hand. I looked at Tamara, forcing a small appreciative smile onto my lips. It looks wonderful, dear, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Thank you for being so thoughtful. I saw a flicker of triumph in her eyes. She thought she had won. I scooped a small amount of the casserole onto my fork. The entire table watched. A silent, captive audience. I raised the fork slowly, bringing the steaming orange mixture towards my mouth. I could smell the cinnamon, the nutmeg and something else. A faint, almost imperceptible chemical bitterness that only my pharmacist's nose could detect. It was the smell of my own medication, but stronger, more concentrated. The confirmation sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Just as the fork was about to touch my lips, I executed my plan. I let out a small, sharp gasp. My eyes went wide and my hand, the one holding the fork, began to tremble violently. I let the fork clatter back onto the plate. My other hand flew to my chest, my breath coming in short, ragged pants. Oh, I gasped, my voice a convincing mixture of surprise and distress. Oh my! It was a perfect, if I do say so myself, imitation of a sudden myasthenic episode. A dizzy spell brought on by muscle weakness. It was a plausible, undeniable symptom of my condition, something my family had witnessed before, though never with such dramatic timing. Instantly, the festive atmosphere of the table shattered. Robert was out of his chair in a second, his face a mask of panic. Mom? What is it? Are you okay? He rushed to my side, his hand on my shoulder. The other guests stared, their faces a mixture of shock and concern. Tamara, for a single unguarded moment, looked not concerned, but furious. I had upstaged her. I had ruined her perfect murderous moment with my own inconvenient drama. In the ensuing chaos, as Robert hovered over me and the other guests murmured in alarm, I made my move. My left hand, which had been resting in my lap, unfolded the large cloth napkin that lay there. With my right hand, the one that had been trembling so convincingly, I used my fork to deftly, swiftly scrape the entire portion of casserole from my plate. The movement was hidden by the angle of my body and the distraction of my supposed crisis. In a single fluid motion, the poison was off my plate and nestled in the soft, absorbent folds of the napkin in my lap. It was a desperate, clumsy maneuver, but in the panic of the moment, no one noticed. I had just palmed a bomb in the middle of a crowded room. I kept up the charade for another minute, allowing my breathing to slowly return to normal. I took a sip of water, my hand still shaking slightly for effect. I'm all right, I finally said, my voice weak but steady, just a little dizzy spell. It passed. Robert looked relieved, but still worried. Maybe you should go lie down, Mom. Yes, Tamara chimed in, her voice dripping with a concern that was now laced with an undeniable edge of frustration. You should go rest, Helen. You've had too much excitement. Her eyes darted to my plate, and for a split second I saw a flicker of confusion. The plate was clean, too clean, but before she could process the anomaly, I was already pushing my chair back. I think you're right, I said, pressing the wadded-up napkin firmly against my thigh, the warmth of the poisoned food a terrifying secret against my skin. I'm so sorry to ruin the dinner. Please everyone, enjoy your meal. I stood up slowly, leaning on Robert for support, playing the part of the frail elderly woman to perfection. As I walked away from the table, I could feel Tamara's eyes on my back, a burning analytical stare. She knew something had gone wrong. Her experiment had been contaminated, but she didn't know how. I had taken her perfect controlled scenario and introduced a variable she had not anticipated, my own will to survive. In the privacy of my bathroom, the mask of frailty fell away. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and my hands were shaking, but this time it was with adrenaline, not feigned illness. I locked the door, the click of the bolt a small satisfying sound of security. I leaned against the cool smooth wood, taking a deep shuddering breath. I had done it. I had survived the first phase of her attack, but I knew this was just the beginning. I looked at the wadded-up napkin in my hand. It was a disgusting lumpy mess of orange sweet potato and gravy, but it was also the most important thing in the world. It was the evidence. It was the truth. And I had to preserve it. My mind, the orderly, methodical pharmacist's mind, took over. Panic was a luxury I could not afford. I needed to think like a scientist, like a crime scene investigator. The sample was contaminated, mixed with gravy from my plate, but the core of it, the casserole itself, was there. I needed a sterile container. My eyes scanned the bathroom, searching. And then I remembered. In my travel bag, tucked away in my closet, was my emergency medication kit. I always kept it packed, a holdover from a lifetime of careful planning. In it, I knew, were several sterile heavy-duty Ziploc bags, the kind I used for carrying my pre-sorted pills and syringes. I moved quickly, my earlier weakness forgotten. I retrieved the bag from my closet and returned to the bathroom. My hands, which had been trembling, were now steady and precise. I carefully opened the napkin over the clean, dry sink. With a small sterile tongue depressor I also kept in my kit, I meticulously scraped every last bit of the casserole into the Ziploc bag. The smell, once so festive, now seemed sinister. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg, a cloying mask for the poison within. I sealed the bag, pressing out as much air as I could. I then took a permanent marker and wrote the date and the time on the bag's white label. Chain of custody. It was a term I remembered from a dozen courtroom dramas. The evidence had to be protected, its integrity maintained. Now, I had to hide it. I couldn't leave it in my room. Tamara was too smart, too suspicious. If she suspected I had saved the food, she would undoubtedly search my room the first chance she got. I needed a place she would never think to look. A place that was both accessible to me and completely mundane. My eyes fell on the laundry hamper in the corner of my closet. It was filled with my dirty clothes. A collection of sensible nightgowns and comfortable cardigans. It was the perfect hiding place. It was intimate, unremarkable, and slightly unpleasant. I tucked the sealed Ziploc bag into the pocket of a discarded robe, then buried it deep at the bottom of the hamper beneath a week's worth of laundry. It was safe. For now. I washed my hands, my face, and rinsed my mouth, trying to scrub away the lingering taste of fear. As I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I saw a different woman looking back at me. The soft, accommodating grandmother was gone. In her place was a woman I hadn't seen in years. Helen Carter, the pharmacist. A woman of science, of evidence, of cold, hard facts. Tamara thought she was dealing with a frail, confused old woman. She had no idea she was in a battle of wits with a scientist. And I had just secured Exhibit A. I spent the rest of the evening in my room, pleading exhaustion. The sounds of the party, the laughter and the music, filtered through my door, a surreal counterpoint to the cold, hard knot of fear in my stomach. I knew I couldn't stay in this house. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like an approaching footstep. I was living in a cage with my own would-be murderer. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. I needed more than just a bag of poisoned food. I needed to understand the why, the how. I needed a case so airtight, so irrefutable that even my own son would be forced to see the truth. My salvation came late that night, long after the last guests had departed and the house had fallen into a heavy post-holiday silence. There was a soft, hesitant knock on my door. My heart leaped into my throat. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice a reedy whisper. "It's me, Grandma," came the whispered reply. "It's Maya." I unlocked the door to find my granddaughter standing in the hallway, her face pale and streaked with tears, her hands clutching a crumpled napkin. She slipped into the room and I closed the door behind her, my heart aching at the sight of her distress. "What is it, sweet?" I asked, guiding her to the small armchair in the corner. She collapsed into the chair, a fresh wave of sobs shaking her small frame. "I was scared," she whispered, her voice thick with a guilt that no 16-year-old should ever have to bear. "I was so scared, Grandma, and I didn't say anything." She told me the story again, the story of what she had seen in the pantry, but this time there were more details that made my blood run cold. "Mom told me not to come in the kitchen while she was making your special food," Maya said, her eyes wide with the memory, "but I forgot my phone in there. I went in through the back door from the garden. She didn't see me. She was so focused." Maya described the scene with a chilling photographic clarity. She described the mortar and pestle, the small pile of white powder, and then she gave me the final crucial piece of the puzzle. "They were your pills, Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The ones you take for your muscles, the ones in the little orange bottle." I saw the bottle on the counter next to her. "She was grinding up your pills." The confirmation was a physical blow. It wasn't a random poison, it was my own medication, a weapon of terrifying specificity, chosen for its unique ability to mimic the very disease it was meant to treat. Tamara wasn't just trying to kill me, she was trying to make my death look like a tragic but entirely natural consequence of my illness. "She told me it was a special vitamin supplement for your condition," Maya continued, the words tumbling out in a rush of confession. "She said she had to grind it up so your body could absorb it better. But she looked so angry when she did it. Her face was all tight and mean. It wasn't the face she uses when guests are here. It was her real face. Her real face." The phrase hung in the air between us, a perfect, devastating summary of the woman my son had married. "I knew it was wrong," Maya sobbed, her face buried in her hands. "But I was scared to say anything, she would have been so mad. And Dad never listens. He always takes her side." I knelt in front of her, my old knees protesting, and took her small trembling hands in mine. "You did nothing wrong, sweetheart," I said, my voice fierce with a protective love that was as powerful as any medicine. "You were brave to tell me now. You are so brave." In that moment, my resolve hardened from steel into diamond. This was no longer just about saving my own life, it was about saving my granddaughter from the toxic, terrifying environment she was trapped in. I had the physical evidence. And now, thanks to Maya, I had an eyewitness. My case was getting stronger, but I still needed the final piece. I needed to understand the motive, the trigger. I needed to find my anonymous caller. The next morning I knew I had to get out of the house. The air was thick with a cloying, artificial sweetness. Tamara was baking an apple pie, a desperate, transparent attempt to restore the facade of domestic bliss that had been shattered the day before. The pretense was suffocating. I told Robert I needed to go to the pharmacy to pick up a refill, an excuse so mundane and believable that he didn't even question it. He was in a state of willful denial, pretending that the dramatic, aborted dinner had been nothing more than a minor hiccup. He offered to drive me, but I insisted on taking a taxi, claiming I wanted the fresh air. The truth was, I couldn't bear the thought of being trapped in a car with him, of having to listen to his platitudes and his excuses for his wife's behavior. The short walk to the corner, where I could call a cab without being seen from the house, felt like a great escape. The crisp November air was a welcome antidote to the stale, poisonous atmosphere I had left behind. I directed the taxi not to my usual pharmacy but to a small public park several miles away. I needed a neutral, anonymous space. I sat on a cold park bench, the autumn leaves crunching under my feet, and pulled out my phone. My heart was pounding as I scrolled through my call history and found it. Unknown number. I stared at it for a long moment, a silent prayer on my lips. What if she didn't answer? What if she had gotten scared and changed her number? My entire plan, my very life, depended on this terrified stranger on the other end of the line. I took a deep, steadying breath and pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, just as I was about to lose hope, she answered. "Hello?" The voice was hesitant, frightened. It was her. It's Helen Carter, I said quickly, my voice low and urgent. The woman you called yesterday. Please don't hang up. I need your help. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a string of panicked whispered Spanish that I couldn't understand. No, no, she finally said in heavily accented English. I cannot talk to you. She will find out. I will lose my job. My license. I'm not going to tell anyone who you are, I promised, my voice pleading. But you were right. She did try to poison me. I have the food. I saved it. And I have a witness who saw her put my own medication into it. I'm building a case, but I need to understand why. Why now? My words seemed to break through her fear. The mention of evidence of a witness seemed to shift the dynamic. She was no longer a lone, terrified voice. She was part of something larger. There was a long pause and then a weary, resigned sob. My name is Maria Sanchez, she said, her voice barely audible. I am a nurse on the same floor as Tamara at the hospital. I have seen things. The way she talks about other nurses she doesn't like. She is vindictive. She finds ways to get them in trouble, to ruin their reputations. Everyone is afraid of her. Maria's voice grew stronger as she spoke, fueled by a long simmering resentment. But the way she talked about you, it was different. It was a real hatred. She called you a burden, a drain on her finances. She complained constantly about your medical bills, about the cost of your medications. The motive, then, was as old and as ugly as time itself. Greed. My continued existence was an obstacle to the comfortable, luxurious life Tamara felt she was owed. But Maria gave me the final crucial piece of the puzzle, the trigger. Last week, she said, her voice dropping again, I overheard her on the phone with your son's financial firm. She was screaming at someone. I think it was about your husband's life insurance policy. She said something like, "What do you mean I can't touch the principal? It's our money." After the call, she was in a rage. She went into the medication room, and I saw her looking up the toxicology reports for your myasthenia gravis medication. Later that day, I heard her talking to another nurse, a friend of hers. She was laughing. She said she had finally found a way to solve the Helen problem for good. She said that soon all her financial worries would be over. The blood in my veins turned to ice. Robert's life insurance. Of course, he had set it up in a trust, with me as the lifetime beneficiary of the interest, but the principal was untouchable until my death, at which point it would pass to Robert Jr. and my grandchildren. Tamara had discovered that she couldn't get her hands on the real money as long as I was alive, and so she had decided to expedite my demise. It was a cold, calculated business decision. I knew I had to do something, Maria whispered, her voice thick with a mixture of fear and resolve. I could not let her do it. It is against everything we are supposed to be as nurses. I closed my eyes, a wave of profound gratitude washing over me. This woman, this stranger, had risked everything to save my life. Maria, I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. You are a hero. I explained my plan, my hypothesis about the specific drug she had used. Maria, with her own medical knowledge, confirmed my fears. She agreed to provide a formal written statement to the police, corroborating what she had seen and heard. My case was now a fortress. I had the physical evidence, an eyewitness, and a whistleblower who could testify to the motive. As I hung up the phone, I knew that Tamara's reign of terror was about to come to a swift and decisive end. I left the park with a sense of cold, clear purpose. I was no longer a victim scrambling for survival. I was an investigator on the verge of closing a case. My mind, the pharmacist's mind that had been my greatest asset for 4 decades, was now fully engaged. I knew I had the what, the how, and the why. But to present an unassailable case to the police, I needed one final definitive piece of proof. I needed a formal scientific confirmation of my hypothesis. Tamara was a nurse. She was intelligent, cunning, and medically knowledgeable. She wouldn't have used a common, easily detectable poison like arsenic or cyanide. That was for amateurs. Her method would be more sophisticated, more insidious. She would have chosen a weapon that could hide in plain sight, a poison that would masquerade as a natural event. My theory was that she had used a massive overdose of my own medication, pyridostigmine. It was the perfect choice for a medical professional trying to commit the perfect crime. The symptoms of an overdose would be nearly identical to the symptoms of a severe fatal flare-up of my disease. It was a murder designed to be misdiagnosed. I couldn't take the evidence to a standard police lab. The request would be too specific, too unusual. They would be looking for known toxins, not a therapeutic drug in a therapeutic drug's clothing. I needed a specialist. I needed someone who understood the subtle, deadly dance of chemical compounds in the human body. I needed my old friend, Dr. Arthur Finch. Arthur and I had gone to pharmacy school together, a lifetime ago. While I had gone into community pharmacy, he had pursued a career in toxicology, becoming one of the most respected forensic toxicologists in the state before his recent retirement. He was a brilliant, cantankerous old man with a mind like a steel trap and a deep, abiding passion for the hidden stories that chemicals could tell. I found him in his home laboratory, a converted garage filled with gleaming, complex machinery that looked like something out of a science fiction film. He was a small, bird-like man with a shock of white hair and eyes that still held the sharp, curious glint of a lifelong scientist. He greeted me with a gruff but genuine affection. "Helen Carter," he grumbled, wiping his hands on a lab coat. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Run out of Sudafed." I smiled, the familiar grumpy banter a comforting balm after the trauma of the past few days. "Something a little more complicated than that, Arthur," I said. I sat down in his cluttered office, the Ziploc bag containing the evidence resting on my lap like a sleeping viper. I told him the entire story, from the Thanksgiving dinner to the anonymous call to Maya's confession. I laid out my hypothesis with the cool, clinical precision of a pharmacist presenting a case study. I explained the unique properties of pyridostigmine, the mechanism of a cholinergic crisis, and the terrifying elegant simplicity of Tamara's plan. As I spoke, I watched his expression change from friendly curiosity to intense professional focus. He leaned forward, his cantankerous demeanor gone, replaced by the sharp analytical focus of the toxicologist he was. He listened without interruption, his eyes fixed on my face, absorbing every detail. When I was finished, he was silent for a long moment. He looked at the Ziploc bag on my lap, then back at me. "She's a nurse, you said?" he asked, his voice a low, grim rumble. I nodded. "A damn good one, apparently," he said, a note of grudging professional respect in his voice. "It's a brilliant method, Helen. Diabolical but brilliant. Almost impossible to detect unless you're specifically looking for it. A standard autopsy would have missed it completely. They would have seen the respiratory failure, the paralysis, and chalked it up to a myasthenic crisis. Your death would have been a tragedy, but it would have been considered a natural one." He stood up and took the Ziploc bag from me, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Let's see what the gas chromatograph has to say about it," he said, his eyes glittering with a familiar scientific fire. "Let's see if we can't make this monster's story come to life." I waited in his office, the minutes stretching into an eternity, while Arthur worked in his lab. The hum of his machinery was a low, steady thrum, the sound of science searching for the truth. I thought about Tamara, about the cold, calculating mind that could devise such a plot. She had used her knowledge, her skills, the very things that were meant to heal, as weapons of death. She had perverted the sacred trust between a nurse and the world, turning her expertise into a tool of murder. It was an evil of a particularly insidious kind, an evil that wore the uniform of a caregiver. An hour later, Arthur returned. He was holding a single sheet of paper, a printout from one of his machines, covered in peaks and valleys, a cryptic, chemical language that only he could read. His face was grim, his earlier grudging respect replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Well, Helen," he said, his voice heavy, "your hypothesis was not only correct, it was an understatement." He laid the paper on the desk in front of me. "The sample contains pyridostigmine. All right. But the concentration, it's astronomical. I've never seen anything like it. Based on the portion size you described, I'd estimate the dosage to be at least 50 times your prescribed daily amount." 50 times, the number hung in the air between us, a stark, clinical measure of Tamara's murderous intent. It was not a dose meant to incapacitate. It was a dose meant to kill, quickly and irreversibly. It would have induced a massive, catastrophic cholinergic crisis within minutes of ingestion. Arthur explained, his voice a low, angry murmur. "Your muscles, all of them, would have gone into overdrive. Then, paralysis. Your diaphragm would have ceased to function. You would have suffocated, fully conscious, unable to move or call for help. And everyone would have stood around, watching you die, thinking it was just your disease." He shook his head, a look of profound, weary sadness in his eye. "This wasn't just an attempt to kill you, Helen," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This was an execution, designed by a monster with a nursing degree." He handed me the lab report, a formal notarized document detailing his findings, the chemical compounds, the precise, lethal dosage. It was the final, irrefutable piece of my case. The perfect murder plot had just met the perfect, scientific proof. The next morning I walked into the police station for the second time. But this time I was not a frightened victim seeking help. I was a prosecutor, armed with an open and shut case. I had requested another meeting with Detective Harris, and I had brought my entire arsenal with me. I sat across from him in the same sterile interview room, but the atmosphere was entirely different. I was calm, composed, and in command. I laid out my evidence on the table between us with the precision of a surgeon arranging her instruments. First, I placed the notarized lab report from Dr. Finch, its clinical scientific language, a stark, irrefutable testament to the poison in the casserole. Exhibit A, I said, my voice even. A forensic toxicology report confirming the presence of a massive fatal overdose of pyridostigmine, a drug prescribed for my specific medical condition. Next, I placed a signed written statement from my granddaughter Maya Carter, detailing her eyewitness account of Tamara grinding the pills and mixing them into the food. Exhibit B, I said, a signed, corroborated eyewitness statement. Finally, I placed the written, notarized statement from Maria Sanchez, the whistleblower nurse, outlining Tamara's motive, her overheard threats, and her suspicious research into the toxicology of my medication. And Exhibit C, I concluded, a statement from a corroborating witness, establishing motive and premeditation. I had presented the police with a fully formed evidence-backed case of attempted murder. I had given them the weapon, the witness, and the motive. I had done their job for them. All they had to do was act. Detective Harris sat there for a long moment, his eyes scanning the documents, his expression shifting from professional interest to a dawning stunned comprehension. He read the toxicology report twice, his brow furrowed in concentration. He looked at Maya's childish, earnest handwriting and Maria's fearful but determined statement. He looked at me, at the calm, resolute woman sitting across from him, and in that moment I saw the shift. I saw him realize that this was not a simple case of domestic strife gone wrong. This was something else entirely. This was a case of profound, calculated, and highly intelligent evil. He leaned back in his chair, a low whistle escaping his lips. In 25 years on the force, he said, his voice a mixture of awe and disgust, I've never seen a case like this. The suspect used the victim's own rare disease as the template for the murder weapon. It's diabolical. He picked up the toxicology report again, shaking his head in disbelief. If you had eaten that food, Miss Carter, if you hadn't gotten that anonymous call, no one would have ever known. The coroner would have signed the death certificate, the family would have mourned, and she would have gotten away with it. Absolutely, 100% gotten away with it. He looked at me, a new profound respect in his eyes. You didn't just save your own life, he said. You solved your own murder. It was at that moment that the true gravity of the situation seemed to land on him, and on the other officers who had gathered at the door of the interview room, drawn by the strange, compelling nature of the case. The initial calm professionalism of the police station began to crack, replaced by a palpable sense of urgency and alarm. I watched as Detective Harris explained the method to his superior officer, a grim-faced captain with a lifetime of experience in his eyes. As he laid out the chillingly brilliant details, the way the overdose of pyridostigmine would induce a cholinergic crisis, the way the symptoms of that crisis would perfectly mimic a fatal flare-up of myasthenia gravis. I saw a wave of genuine professional panic ripple through the room. These were seasoned, hardened detectives. They had dealt with stabbings, shootings, and all manner of brutal, violent crimes. But this was different. This was not a crime of passion. This was a crime of intellect. They were not dealing with a common thug. They were dealing with a highly intelligent, medically trained suspect who had designed a nearly undetectable murder weapon. The sophistication of the plot, the sheer cold-blooded intelligence behind it was something they had never encountered before. It was a crime that could have easily slipped through the cracks of their own system, a murder that would have been misclassified as a natural death. And that realization, the realization that they had almost missed a perfect crime, was what terrified them. The captain's face was grim. This woman, this Tamara Carter, he said, his voice a low, urgent growl, is not just a murderer. She's a professional. She knows our procedures. She knows what we look for. She knows how to cover her tracks. We can't treat this like a standard domestic assault. He turned to Detective Harris, his eyes blazing with a new intensity. I want a full team on this. Now, get a warrant for her house, her computer, her phone. I want a forensics team to go over that kitchen with a fine-tooth comb. We need to find that mortar and pestle. We need to find traces of the drug. We are not going to give this woman a single inch of wiggle room. We are going to build a case so solid, so airtight, that she will never see the outside of a prison cell again. The energy in the station shifted from investigation to mobilization. Phones were ringing. Officers were moving with a new, swift purpose. They understood that they were not just arresting a suspect, they were neutralizing a significant ongoing threat. A woman with that level of medical knowledge and that degree of homicidal intent was a danger to everyone. Who knew what other problems she might have decided to solve with her unique deadly skill set? My role in the drama was over. I had delivered the case and now, the machinery of justice was grinding into motion. As Denise and I left the station, I felt a profound, weary sense of closure. The pharmacist in me had done her job. I had identified the toxin, analyzed the data, and presented the findings. And in doing so I had not only saved my own life, but I had exposed a monster who was hiding in plain sight, cloaked in the sacred trusted uniform of a nurse. The final act was swift and decisive. The police, now fully aware of the cunning and danger that Tamara represented, did not move with the clumsy, predictable force of a standard police raid. They moved with the strategic, silent precision of a military operation. They understood that they were dealing with a suspect who would destroy evidence at the first sign of trouble. They secured a no-knock warrant, citing the extreme nature of the crime and the high probability of evidence tampering. The next afternoon, as Tamara was in her pristine designer kitchen, likely planning her next holiday menu, her perfect, curated world came to an abrupt and violent end. A team of plain-clothed detectives and a full forensics unit descended upon the quiet suburban street. They didn't knock, they simply entered. I can only imagine the scene. The look of pure uncomprehending shock on Tamara's face as her home was suddenly filled with grim-faced professionals. Their movements efficient, their purpose undeniable. The moment of dawning horror as she saw Detective Harris, the man who would become the architect of her downfall, present her with the warrant. And the final soul-shattering moment, when Robert Jr., who had been working in his home office, emerged to find his wife being read her rights, his perfect, curated life shattering into a million irreparable pieces. The forensics team, I later learned, found everything. They found the mortar and pestle in the back of the pantry, still containing trace amounts of the pyridostigmine powder. They found the box of latex gloves. They found her laptop open to a web page detailing the lethal dosage levels for a cholinergic crisis. She had been so arrogant, so confident in the perfection of her plan, that she hadn't even bothered to cover her tracks. Tamara was arrested, her hands cuffed behind her back and led out of her palace of lies in front of all her neighbors, the very people she had worked so hard to impress. The mask of the perfect hostess, the caring nurse, the loving wife, was finally irrevocably ripped away, revealing the cold reptilian monster beneath. Robert's world, the world he had so carefully protected with his willful blindness, imploded. The evidence was undeniable. The lab reports, the eyewitness testimony, the confession of the whistleblower nurse. It was a mountain of truth that even he could not ignore. He was forced to see his wife not as the ambitious, stressed woman he had made excuses for, but as a cold-blooded, calculating murderer who had been sleeping next to him for 20 years. The trial was a formality. Faced with the overwhelming evidence, Tamara's high-priced lawyer had no choice but to plead guilty in exchange for a lesser sentence. She was sentenced to life in prison, her medical license permanently revoked, her name forever a stain on the profession she had so profoundly disgraced. In the aftermath, I did the only thing a mother could do. I stepped into the wreckage of my son's life and helped him pick up the pieces. He was a broken man, consumed by a grief and a guilt so profound it was a physical presence. But in his brokenness, there was a new humility, a new willingness to see the world as it was, not as he wished it to be. I did not say "I told you so," I simply loved him, and for the first time in a long time he was able to truly receive that love. My first and most important act was to secure the legal guardianship of Maya. She had been through an unimaginable trauma, and she needed a place of safety, of stability, of unwavering love. She came to live with me in my quiet, peaceful condo, and together we began to heal. My story closes here, in the quiet, sun-filled living room of my own home. Maya is in the kitchen, her laughter a bright, beautiful sound as she talks on the phone with a friend. I am sitting in my favorite armchair, a cup of tea in my hand, the afternoon sun warm on my face. I am at peace. I often think about the terrible irony of it all. Tamara saw my illness, my asthenia gravis, as a weakness, a vulnerability to be exploited. She believed it would be the perfect silent weapon in her perfect crime, but she was wrong. My illness was not my weakness, it was my strength. It was the source of the specialized knowledge that allowed me to understand her method. It was the reason I had a network of brilliant, dedicated medical professionals like Arthur Finch to call upon. It was the very thing that saved my life. I have learned that in this life, our greatest vulnerabilities can often become our most formidable strengths, and that the most dangerous poisons are not the ones that can be measured in a lab, but the ones that hide in plain sight, in the hearts of the people we are supposed to trust. Now I'm curious about you, who have listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever had to trust your instincts, even when the world told you that you were being dramatic? Comment below. Thank you for watching.